When establishing the creative direction for any scene that I might be working in regarding the lighting, and specifically in this case for the Vickery attic scene, the first question I asked myself was, what story am I trying to tell? Because everything, the lighting, the composition, the details in the frame, they need to work together to support that story. So for this attic scene, I wanted to create a nighttime setting with a moody, mysterious vibe to it. Something that feels like it has history, but also leaves room for the story to continue to unfold within. I didn't want to give too much away, but I wanted viewers to feel intrigued. At the same time, it was important to me that the scene felt grounded in a believable world and had a well-balanced exposure with realistic colors and motivated light sources. The next step was to gather reference, as much reference as I possibly could and as much of a variety of reference as I can gather. That process will typically look the same regardless of whatever project I'm working on. And so the type of references that I will gather would be real life reference, photo reference, and that's what you'll see down here. That could mean maybe even taking your camera or your phone to take photos of the environment around you if it kind of relates to the subject matter, the scene that you're working on, that is. Often though, it will simply just be a Google search and I can just type it in Google, search it up, copy the images straight out of Google into PureRef, paste them into my reference board here. These ones I believe were straight up off of Google or Pinterest or both. As well as that though, I will often also get reference images from movies and TV shows that relate to the scene that I might be working on, whether that's the specific time of day as well as the environment in terms of how it relates to the scene I'm working on, or it might just be the environment itself and the time of day might be different, as we can see here in The Servant, this show on Apple TV. It kind of takes place here in this attic. Even though it's daytime, it's still helpful to use that as reference. And then these ones as well. This one, I believe it's daytime, but it's in an attic, so it's still helpful to use as reference. And I believe this one as well. I thought that one might be closer to nighttime. These ones here in The Witcher, these are nighttime. These one here from Caroline is nighttime. In any case, it's just kind of getting as much reference as you can that relates to the subject matter that you're working on in various ways, right? You can pull different elements. For example, this image here from Toy Story, I'm not even sure it's an attic. It might not be daytime, but it's good reference in terms of how a practical light looks when you're exposing for midtones to kind of those shadow regions within the frame. And so we can kind of see that it's blowing out, right? Because we're exposing for those midtones and shadows when we see the light source itself, as we do here, as well as here, it would kind of blow out. And so I tried to carry that through into my final image here. And so overall, I tried to also carry over those kind of complementary color tones, the color contrast from The Witcher that we see, those warm to cool tones, carried that throughout. The cool tones have been kind of introduced through the nighttime natural ambient lighting. And then the warmer tones are just kind of indicated here by the lamp itself, drawing the eye to the center of the frame. And then I also use these as reference for volumetrics. We'll see some volumetrics here in these photos of these within these attic kind of settings. And then also within these movies and TV shows, we see some volumetrics as well as these renders over here, right? And so I kind of wanted just to keep them subtle. They are moon rays, as it were. It's nighttime, so I didn't want them to be too strong. I just wanted them to kind of supplement or complement the frame and lead the eye through the frame towards the center of the frame. As for the colors, otherwise, the blue, I could have made it very saturated as this artist did here, or I could have made it more green. I kind of wanted to find a middle ground, again, keeping it as balanced as I could. I wanted the overall look to kind of work, whether it was for animation or live action. So I didn't want it to be too saturated, keeping it more in the realm specifically towards kind of cartoons or animation. And I also didn't want it to be too desaturated where it might be overly realistic or more towards kind of a horror-like type of mood or setting. And so I kind of wanted to find that middle ground, keep it as balanced as I possibly could. So for the blue kind of color indicating that nighttime lighting, I wanted it to be more in line with a kind of silver blue kind of tone. And that's kind of what I did for that. The next step is determining where you want to draw the viewer's attention within the frame to determine your focus. This involves determining your primary focal point. So I'm just going to right click on the canvas here, go draw mode. And as you can evidently see, just based off of the lighting, the framing, the composition that was set up ahead of time by the artist who created this scene, the primary focal point for the render that I worked on is the work desk with the artwork. So that is the number one focal point. The number two kind of focal point is screen left with the window and the telescope right there. And then the third focal point would be this kind of negative space over here on screen right. Now that's effectively not as much of a focal point per se. It's more of a kind of tertiary area meant to kind of support and subtly enhance the overall mood and the story. It's moderately exposed and acts as an entry or exit point where characters might move in and out of frame or throughout the scene. With that said, I'm just going to jump into Maya to illustrate the process that I sometimes use to determine this hierarchy. After loading the downloaded scene, I will assess the viewport perspective through the camera view. And so one way to do this is you can go to Panels, Perspective, and then just select the render camera here corresponding to this specific scene that we have open. Now, while doing this, I will consider how the composition has been set up. Composition principles like the rule of thirds, the golden ratio, general symmetry, and leading lines can help with decisions regarding what the focal points might be. Though I don't always follow these rules strictly, they are helpful for establishing clear visual structure. For this scene, there's a strong sense of symmetry and center framing, as well as a strong indication of leading lines through the set detail here, guiding the eye to the center of the frame. Given this, I decided that the work desk would serve as the primary focal point, with elements like the recently worked on artwork, it looks like here, further reinforcing that focus. I definitely could have focused on the window and telescope and then let the rest of the environment fall into shadow. However, by emphasizing the work desk and the artwork on it, it let me create multiple acting areas within the scene, which adds depth to the scene overall, and it also helped me to establish that environment where a story could kind of continue to unfold within, which was part of my goal from the outset. With that being said, let's jump back into PureRef. Now that we've established the focal points, the next step is to explore how the lighting supports the composition and the story that we're trying to tell. While refining light relationships is very much an iterative process, it's still helpful to consider how your primary, your secondary, and your ambient light sources might interact before diving into the technical setup. In this case, the desk lamp has become the primary light source as it naturally aligns with the primary focal point. We can use this to emphasize the work desk by carefully refining its intensity and its saturation levels, as I've kind of tried to do here. In addition to that, the warm glow, which I've added here in comp, naturally directs the viewer's eye towards the center of the frame. The moonlight then, acting as the secondary light, introduces cooler tones that contrast the warm desk lamp and also helps to fill in the shadows overall. It reinforces the focal point and highlights a secondary area of interest, being the window on screen left with the telescope. And so by incorporating these reference images into our workflow and pulling elements from them, it can help us to assess how the light sources within the scene might ultimately come together and work together within the frame. For example, the moonlight's light shape here on the ground and its light rays naturally guide the viewer's eye toward the center of the frame. And in addition to that, the balance between, again, the warm to cool contrast also helps to pull the viewer's eye into the frame. And so it's ultimately about utilizing all of your light sources in a way that helps to engage the viewer, establish the look and feel you're going for, and tell the story that you might be trying to tell.